Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time frame it is, wherever the participants are, and welcome to this session on In Dire Straits, the Need for Collective Action for Water Security, which falls under the theme of well-being of people and planet in the C20 Virtual Water Summit. I would like to welcome our speakers that we have today. Ms. Sarah Ahmed, Mr. Bruno Oberle, Dr. Loïc Fachon, Paul Ganter, and Carmen Nonne. I will be giving further introductions, details around each of the speakers as I call on them to speak, but I would like to welcome them and thank them for giving their time to this extremely important discussion. I'd also like to briefly introduce myself. I am Barbara Schreiner. I am the director of the Water Integrity Network, which is an organization working on trying to reduce the risk of corruption and improve integrity in the water sector globally, which is a not insignificant task. And as you can see, I have worked in the water sector long enough to go grey in the service of the water sector, as I see have some of the others on our panel today. And I've worked mainly in developing countries in the issue of governance and water security. So I think we have a huge topic to address within a relatively limited time frame. And the context that we're examining this question in is one in which climate change is profoundly affecting the world that we live in, particularly in relation to water. Too much, too little, at the wrong time. And obviously we're addressing this in the context of a global pandemic that has profoundly affected the global economy, increased the number of unemployed people significantly around the world, and reduce the tax base from which water security is funded. And it's also obviously compelled us to have this event online. There isn't a single definition of water security, but I think the key elements of water security can be captured in this idea. It's the dynamic capacity of the water system and of water stakeholders to safeguard sustainable and equitable access to adequate quantities and acceptable quality of water that is continuously, physically, and legally available at an affordable cost for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development, for ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability, which is quite a mouthful. It's a fairly wide-ranging concept and phrase. So it thus covers across from the household to the individual level to the national and international level, covers socio-economic water requirements and ecosystem requirements. It also requires us to examine the issue of the last mile and ensure that we address the water security of the most marginalized and vulnerable populations, many of whom are being significantly impacted on by climate change as well. What we're hoping in this session today is that we can have some constructive discussion, looking positively about what can be done, rather than too much focus on the very significant challenges that are facing us in terms of water security. This is a time in which we need to be able to drive collective action and not allow ourselves to get demoralized. There is a lot of change that we can bring about and need to. The format of the program today is that each of the speakers is going to make some introductory remarks. Then I have some questions for the speakers, and then we will be opening it to the participants for questions. That will be followed then by some brief concluding remarks from the panelists. In terms of the questions, can I please ask participants if you have any questions to insert them into the Zoom, into the chat. We will then be able to respond to the questions that come through in written form. So that will be the way that we will be running the session today. We're now going to start with a pre-recorded message from Amina Mohammed, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Mohammed was the Minister of Environment of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where she steered that country's efforts on climate action and efforts to protect the natural environment. She first joined the United Nations in 2012 as Special Advisor to the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, with a responsibility for the post-2015 development planning. He led the process that resulted in global agreement around the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I would like to now call on our technical people to please give us the pre-recorded message from Amina Mohammed.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to greet the largest virtual gathering of civil society organizations in the history of the C20. This unprecedented year has highlighted the need to engage all levels of government, all sectors of society, all walks of life in the solutions we need. The COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on our lives and livelihoods, and it has exposed fundamental deficiencies in our development systems and environmental assets. Water, the key to life and one of the keys to COVID-19 prevention, is more insecure than ever before. The number of water-stressed regions is rapidly increasing. The numbers are staggering and they're unacceptable. Today, more than 2 billion people still lack access to safe drinking water. 4.2 billion people lack access to safely managed sanitation services. Water insecurity leads to ripple effects for individuals and communities, threatening the most basic health needs, increasing food insecurity, threatening jobs, and ultimately creating all of the drivers for conflict and insecurity. We must reverse course and find solutions to these pressing challenges. As the world's population continues to grow, we will need more and more water for our health, our food, and to meet the demand of energy and manufacturing. We must strengthen water management and financing across national and local governments. We have the tools, but they need scaling up, urgently. Sustainable Development Goal 6 of the 2030 Agenda provides an excellent framework to achieve water security. When world leaders meet at the G20, I hope they will recommit to SDG 6 and further commit to solving the global water crisis. But we cannot achieve SDG 6 without civil society. We need your voices, your innovations, new technologies from entrepreneurs, new data from academics, and new ideas from young people. We need the leaders of urban slums and rural communities that lack access to safe, clean water to raise the alarm bells. I call on you to raise awareness and bring your solutions to this summit. Lives, jobs, and the security of communities are at stake. We need you, and we thank you again for your engagement and support.
Well, I think that message from Amina Mohammed has set out very clearly for us what the challenge is going forward, and some of the issues that we will try to discuss and in this session, and bring some practical and constructive solutions to the table, coming from the perspective of civil society. And I'm very glad that she stressed the importance of civil society of all natures and forms in trying to find solutions to the considerable problems that are facing us in terms of finding sufficient water to meet the needs of the world. I'm now going to move on to call on the speakers to address us. The first person I'm going to call on is Dr. Sarah Ahmed, who is the founder of the Living Waters Museum and the director of WaterAid India. She launched the Living Waters Museum in 2017, and they are a founder member of the Global Network of Water Museums, which was endorsed by the UNESCO IHP in 2018. And she is in fact on the board of the Global Network of Water Museums. She has over 25 years of applied research on water, livelihoods, and social equity. She's been actively engaged in teaching and mentoring young development professionals, managing large and complex water research portfolios on water, food security, and climate change, and advising a range of development organizations and networks, both national and global, as a board member and in other leadership capacities. So, Sarah, we are very delighted to have you here, and let me hand over to you for your introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to do the share screen. Where is my presentation? So thank you for this opportunity. I've just got 3 opening remarks to make in terms of what I would call reimagining our shared water, because we are talking about collective action and water security. So what does that mean? So first of all, I'd like to say that it requires us to build a new ethical value for how we look at what water is and what water means for all users around the world. And this is very much ingrained in the charter of the global network of water museums. And the poem on the right is by young girls in a school in central India, in a small village, and where they took it upon themselves to not only talk about water, but to think about little actions that they could do in their school in terms of saving water and also influencing their adults. So the whole idea to build this ethical framework to think about how we use water, how we conserve it, how we store it, what we do with it, how we respect it, is, I think, integral to the understanding of collective action around water security. I want to say from my work with the water museums and our own virtual museum, I've been looking a lot at the role of heritage around water and trying to understand how communities managed water in the past. These were not always equitable systems. We know that people were excluded on the basis of gender, on the basis of caste, on the basis of faith. But these systems were in communities. There were rules and management for these systems. And over the years, we have obviously evolved with pipelines and massive water distribution systems that have somehow disconnected communities from the water that they know for so many years. And so with this, with development, with greater water usage, with wastage of water in terms of flushing of toilets and so many other things that I can think of, we've lost that connect with water. And in India, with the Jal Jeevan mission, the Water and Livelihoods mission, but also the recreation or the new avatar of our water ministry called the Jal Shakti, which is water and power. I mean, not power in terms of energy, but power in terms of people and resources. I think we're beginning to look at the importance of secondary water sources, so-called secondary community water sources. And what you see in this image is a step well on the left-hand side, and many of these step wells were built in the 14th century and supported by patrons, particularly when women, as meritorious acts. So they were also named after women. And of course, now many of them are lying in ruins across the landscape of Western India. And the step wells go right up to Central Asia as well. And on the right, you see, not very well, I'm afraid, but you see on the top what's called a little stepwell cafe in the town of Rajasthan in Jodhpur, and how they have, through public-private partnership, built a whole community around the stepwell, not just a cafe, but places for people to sit. And what you don't see in the picture are shops, but in a way, restoring and renovating a water resource, but also looking for a financially sustainable model for that. The third point I just wanted to make is about art as social practice and political practice, and also cultural practice. I'm very glad to see that in the summit there is space for what is art and activism, or activism through art. And through the work that we've been doing, and over all the years that I've spent in the water sector, I find that we've really lost touch with the creative spirit around talking about water, which we have in music, in our storytelling, in indigenous belief systems, in performance art, and of course in the visual arts. So we've been working with young people to help them think through this water heritage and communicate this in a manner in which is engaging for young people. And I think that is integral to SDG 6, which was behind the recognition by UNESCO IHP, the International Hydrology Program of UNESCO, of the whole water museum network. And art is not only about what you see in galleries and so on. This is actually lived art. And art is a means of communication on citizen science, on complex data, on the rights of communities, the rights of indigenous people again. We're beginning to do this. The Global Network last year had a very interesting campaign asking children to visualize the water that they want. And we had entries from 400 children around the world in the form of videos, images, and photographs. And what you see here on the screen is actually an interactive story built around the stepwells using a little girl who falls down the stepwell and then has to find her way out by switching off these water taps that are actually sucking the groundwater from rural areas and transporting it to urban areas. And on the left corner of your screen is a storytelling event on water with children with special needs and getting them also to think about water. So I think the arts helps us reach out to a much wider audience in many diverse ways and helps build a critical voice around water as well, and a critical space for conversations. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Sarah. Some very interesting ideas around ethical values and around heritage and art and the relationship of communities to water. Thank you very much for that. I'm now going to call on Dr. Bruno Oberle to give us his comments. He is the Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. He is somebody who over the years has investigated and shaped the interface between environmental policy, economic development, and social balance from the perspective of the state regulator, acting as an entrepreneur and also as a scientist. He's held a number of high-level positions in public office while maintaining an academic and research career. He was the Swiss Secretary of State for the Environment and played a key role in the Global Environmental Facility and establishing the Green Climate Fund. He was on the board of directors of the European Environmental Agency and on its committee. He remains a member of the steering body of UNEP's inquiry into the design of a sustainable financial system. He served as chair on the Green Economy and Resource Governance Program and headed the International Risk Governance Center at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. His work focuses on the transition to a society which generates greater benefits with less natural resources, thus respecting the limits of our planet, a very critical issue if we are trying to look at how we're going to actually achieve water security. Dr. Oberle, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Schreiner. The story of fresh water, ladies and gentlemen, is a story of a resource that dwindles as demand for its source. And this tension lies at the earth of water security. In the next 4 minutes, I will show two main issues in water security: the pressure we place on water on one side, and the narrow way we tend to view this pressure resource. First, on the pressure placed on water, we may live on a blue planet, but only for 3% of the water that covers Earth can be used to quench the thirst of almost 8 billion people, to feed the plants and crops that cover the land and provide a home for aquatic animals. As our population grows, so does the global demand for water, by some estimate up to 55% by 2030. At the same time, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution continue to shrink the amount of water the world can use, as well as the capacity of ecosystem to regenerate fresh water. Saudi Arabia, the hosting country of this year's C20 summit, knows this very well because of where it is. The Middle East is perhaps the most water-stressed region in the world, and desertification is causing huge problems in countries such as Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Iran. However, despite our water directly impacts on our very survival, we tend to view this precious resource in such a narrow way, which it is second key issue in water security. Traditionally, water management was handled by specific agencies whose missions were specifically geared towards water. They have fulfilled their given mandate generally well, but as we understand more about water, it has become clearer that water, like the arms of a river, connects many different fields that have to be considered to manage water. And so we need action on a bigger scale with more stakeholders in more fields. In other words, we need collective action. For example, look at agriculture, which uses up to 85% of water in the Middle East. Since 2017, IUCN was working with UNEP and partners in Jordan and Egypt to improve 500,000 hectares of rangelands, traditional lands where communities graze their livestock. These lands were affected by desertification and degradation, and we recognized that to overcome this, we needed to look not just at protecting the watersheds, but also food security, poverty reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable agricultural practices using traditional knowledge and science. It was collective action that required expertise from different fields and from players in government, the private sector, academia, and crucially, the communities on the ground. Now, 500,000 hectares of rangelands are coming back to life, improving the livelihoods of the 30,000 people who live within them. This is only one example of the collective action that tackles the pressure we place on water and the narrow way in which we view this precious resource. I look forward to hearing from my other fellow panelists on this, and as we have different viewpoints that together are the foundation of our collective action.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Oberle, and a very interesting point there that collective action needs to stretch across sectors and not just be collective action within the water sector. We're sometimes very good in the water sector talking to ourselves about the challenges and solutions, but yes, water connects all of the sectors, and we need to be able to look at collective action in a broader concept. So thank you very much for that. I now hand over to Dr. Loic Fauchon, someone who has extensive experience in the water sector and in water-related activities. Since 2018, he's been the president of the World Water Council, an international multi-stakeholder platform which mobilizes action on critical water issues and also is responsible for organizing the World Water Forums. He was one of the founders of the World Water Council in 1995. He has extensive experience in private water operations as well. From 1991 to 2019, he was the Director General, the Chief Executive Officer, and then the President of the Water Supply Company of Marseille, SEM. He founded the disaster relief NGO Trans-Sahara Caravan Sans Frontières, as well as Water Help, SEM's official humanitarian response program. He's a member of several international and non-governmental organizations and the high-level expert and leaders panel on water and disasters help. He was awarded the French Legion of Honor in 2003. So another esteemed speaker that we have on our panel today. Dr. Fauchon, over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Schreiner, dear colleagues, dear friends of water. I'd like to thank the C20 presidency for inviting us to participate in this virtual meeting. That's a great honor for the World Water Council I'm chairing and for its 400 member organizations. Some are in this panel as IUCN and World Bank. Securing water is at the heart of our thinking. At the at the heart in the same time of our daily action to provide water to everyone, to everywhere, and at any time. And water security ensures life and harmonious development for human beings as well as for nature. For us, the international community of water, that I like to call the great family of water, water security stands on 3 pillars. And these pillars are governance, finance, and knowledge. In French language, connaissance. And governance first and foremost is a strong but mysterious word, a word that touches upon political and economic power. Nowadays, when it comes to water, but as well as all essential needs, we want to promote a new approach of governance with a three-fold one: concerting, deciding, sharing. To concert, to discuss, because defining a water policy can no longer be the prerogative of a few at the top of a state or an international organization. Local communities know the best the local water history, the needs and realities on the ground. To decide by setting up competences and responsibilities at each level, particularly concerning hydrographic basins and municipalities and cities. Decisions taken at appropriate level make a real impact on the daily life of populations. To share water for all and not just for a few, sharing rather than looting. Sharing means pulling together local resources such as boreholes, seasonal and other reservoirs. It also means preventing pollution of some from poisoning the lives of others. But good governance alone is not enough. It must have the means at its disposal. And first, financial means. Water lacks money, for sure. Why is it so? Because guns often come before taps. Military budgets come before civilian budgets, and cell phones before fresh water. There's no doubt that financing determines demand, and therefore the volume and the type of projects retained. The investor is the one to determine the type of operation he intends to finance. The specificities of the target country or region are not always or enough considered. The principle of sub-sovereignty, which is not widely applied, should not be omitted. It allows a city or a region to borrow without state guarantees. In this respect, the World Water Council strongly encourages the increase of blended finance, both in terms of volume and quantity. The Council also recommends considering local authorities and communities' expertise requiring finances because they are often too poor and vulnerable when facing financial and bank institutions. Beyond financial resources, the third pillar is the one of innovation and knowledge sharing. Innovating is not exclusively owned by rich and technologically advanced countries. Reused water, for example, has been practiced for more than 30 years in Tunisia and Morocco. The South outpaced the North. It also concerns water treatment plants adapted to arid region, which are installed in the Middle East, in Egypt, for example, or in the Mediterranean, thanks to local engineers' knowledge. Water security clearly needs to make people understand and accept the idea that additional resources are needed to cope with population growth and climate evolution. And to increase water supply and simultaneously to regulate demand through change in human behavior for better management and water savings. In one word, produce more and consume less. Only when these principles will be applied across the planet, we will have the opportunity to achieve water security for all human users, but also to preserve ecosystem and enhance biodiversity. Water for people and water for nature. This is a necessary mix to guarantee the future for our planet. These are the first comments I would like to bring in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loic. Thank you very much for that indeed. And thank you for introducing the notion of power and the role of communities and at the sub-sovereign level. I think it was Mark Twain who said that water tends to flow uphill towards power. And that's something that we need to address if we are looking at water security for marginalized and poor communities in particular. I'm now going to hand over to Carl Ganter. Carl is the co-founder and director of the Circle of Blue, the internationally recognized Center for Original Frontline Reporting, Research and Analysis of Water Resource Issues, and the Water Food Energy Nexus. He's an award-winning photojournalist, reporter, and broadcaster, and co-founder and president of the Vector Center with the Perception Reality Engine. He's a past member of the Global Futures Council on Environment and Natural Resource Security, World Economic Forum, and New Vision for Agriculture Leadership Network. He's the past vice chairman of the Global Agenda Council on Water Security, World Economic Forum, a recipient of the Rockefeller Foundation Centennial Innovation Award, and a graduate in American Studies and MSJ in Investigative Reporting from the Medhill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Carl, can I hand over to you?
Yes, absolutely. First off, can you hear me and can you see my slide? There should be a blue circle up, right?
Both, yes.
Fantastic. Well, it is really an honor here, and I think my greatest honor is as a journalist at Circle of Blue, I have the responsibility and to cover some of these many stories. So I direct a team of journalists reporting from the front lines. I mean, I think everything we've heard this morning, it's about people, it's about culture, it's about economies. And so that's what I thought I'd do this morning or afternoon. It's very early here in the United States, is take my moments to show you some of these front lines. And that's what I like to do here. But first, a couple of the key points we've heard already. Yes, I'm the journalist, so I try to listen a little bit better here, particularly with my coffee at my side. Ethical values, and we've lost the connect. I thought that was really profound. And water connects all the sectors, concerting, defining, and sharing. So it truly is all about connecting, and it's all about storytelling as well. And I think, as we've heard earlier here, is that we are really on the forefront of the world's most important story. And here's a little bit of what that looks like. So we work with astronaut Jerry Linenger, who spent 4 months orbiting this blue planet. Of course, there's just a tiny bit of fresh water on the ground. And so I asked Jerry, if I dropped a golf ball out of the space station mirror, where would it land? And he was telling me about this picture of dust storms over Inner Mongolia, blowing all the way to Los Angeles. So the systemic connections around the planet of water, droughts, and natural systems. This is where that golf ball would land. It'd be some of the world's largest mines in Inner Mongolia. And around these mines, of course, people are people. People like Wu Yun, and Wu Yun's the daughter of an Inner Mongolian shepherd. And she pointed out that the coal mines, and even further in the distance, the large coal power plant were all draining the water tables so much that their wells had gone dry. So the water, this nexus of water, food, and energy, if we underscore and look at energy and how it's affecting our water supplies, energy is very, very thirsty. And I think anything that we can all agree on here this morning too, and those listening, is that the future is here ahead of schedule. All the good things and a lot of the bad things and some of the grandest challenges of our lifetime. And so what's this look like in certain parts of the world? This is north of Delhi, where women were planting rice in the rice paddy. And it didn't smell like raw sewage, which I expected in this case, just because of the location, because the groundwater was declining. It smelled more of industrial waste. So again, when we talk about our systems and even our supply chains, I went upstream to see where their water was coming from, because they still had to plant their rice. And so they were relying on contaminated water from this paper mill for growing their food, for growing their rice. They actually pray that the wastewater continues until they can move their children and their families to the city. Here outside of Delhi as well, they're washing the beets. They're washing beets using groundwater because they have to wash them before they go to market, because they've been irrigated with wastewater, with untreated sewage. And they also, many of these farmers outside of some of these urban areas don't eat their own food. They have separate plots. The food they ship to the cities comes from the larger, more questionable irrigation sources. Another key point here too, we talk about urban centers and how they're being affected. This is another grand challenge, and I think that many of our coastal cities face, and Jakarta is truly on those front lines. You've read about the seawall up in the upper right corner that's really holding back the ocean. Because due to a lack of wastewater treatment and overpumping of groundwater, the city continues to settle. It continues to sink. So that seawall is holding back the ocean from flooding the homes of millions of people. What also is happening in our coastal areas is the shift in agriculture and a shift in economies. And these are happening right now. This is the Delta, the Mekong Delta. And it's probably the last rice harvest in this finger of the Delta, because the rice paddies were turning brown because of salinification. So I'll stop there. I just want to underscore, and we'll come back to this, I hope, in the conversation, that this truly is the most profound story of our generation, of our lifetime. And it will take a combination of culture, diversity, and also particularly engaging young people in telling their stories and bringing art to the fore as well to motivate us from the heart. Thank you.
Carl, thank you very much for that indeed, and thank you very much for some very powerful photographs that tell the story extremely well, and that bring that whole issue of the links between art and storytelling and water to the fore again. But also thank you very much for stressing the whole concept of connectivity of people and water, but also connectivity of systems around the world, and how we have to address that issue of connectivity in terms of addressing these challenges. The final speaker, last but definitely not least, is Carmen None from the World Bank. Carmen is an experienced leader in international development. She has more than 20 years of experience in 3 institutions of the World Bank Group, the World Bank, the IFC, and MEGA, ranging from private sector investments to policy reforms or building capacity to help developing countries in achieving the SDGs. She's currently leading the World Bank's water sector in the Middle East and North Africa, overseeing a $3.5 billion portfolio in more than 20 countries, with a team located in both Washington, D.C. and in country offices. She also has extensive experience in successfully mobilizing funds for the World Bank and managing more than $2 billion worth of trust funds and partnerships with other banks. Carmen, can I hand over to you?
Many thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to engage with the civil society. This is a great event. And what I would like to bring to the theme of the session of water security is to start off with the concept of how we are approaching at the World Bank this issue of water security, but in a very specific context, in the one of fragility and conflict and violence countries. As we know, water security slows growth and impedes development and human welfare. When we translate that into the global economic losses, water security touches upon different aspects of the ecosystem, from the degradation to the pollution damage. And although it's hard to put a number and monetize what it is, it provides significant threat to future water provision, especially in the context of climate change, as many of my other panel members have mentioned. Our vision in the World Bank is a water secure world for all. And what does that translate into? It translates into a broad long-term strategy to focus on sustaining water resources, delivering services, and building resilience. And I think now more than ever with the COVID pandemic, that is very, very relevant. As we all know, the World Economic Forum found that water was the top threat facing economies and communities over the coming 10 years. We also know that they found that fragility poses the greatest threat in the near term, because that is where we see the governments failing to provide water services. And this is where we also see the governments failing to protect the people against water-related hazards like drought, flood, or waterborne diseases. All of this increase, for sure, the potential to aggravate fragility even more. And we have a huge potential here to have an increase on a vicious circle, because then water security will be more a threat. So in order for us in the World Bank to find ways that we can disrupt these harmful dynamics that are happening in the FCV, we have come to prioritize and design water-related investment programs that can contribute both to sustainable development as well as stability. And I want to give you 3 quick examples of what we're doing. For example, we're acting in real conflict situations. Let me take the case of Yemen. We remain engaged despite the active conflict that is happening because we believe it's crucial to preserve the local service delivery in order to prevent further human suffering and also to identify entry points for post-conflict engagement. We currently support operations for livelihood, for health and nutrition activities that are benefiting more than 9 million people and that are undertaking analytical work that will prepare for timely post-conflict engagement. And as many of you know, Yemen is the worst humanitarian crisis the world has ever faced. Second, we're also acting in post-conflict situations. Let me give you the example of Bosnia. There, we help to restore water services. In Mostar, during the Bosnian War, the city water utility was split. What was once a unified service provider for all the city residents became 2 ethnically segregated entities in the midst of the conflict. And during 2000-2004, we helped to reintegrate Mostar's utility and began providing unified water and sewage services to the city residents for all ethnicities. And third, we also act in what we call, in quote, relatively quiet periods of fragility, so we can seek to strengthen resilience to water-related shocks if they're to happen. Let me give you the example of Sierra Leone. Prior to the outbreak of Ebola, we have supported the government to enhance the service performance and financial sustainability of the country's largest water utility. And when Ebola hit, and many of the large customers scaled back or shut down their business, the water utility was still able to meet costs, sustain revenues, retain staff at work, and keep operations going. Utility's ability to deliver clean water enabled it to be an active partner in the Ebola virus disease response that was extending services with humanitarian actors into the poorest areas of Freetown. And our call is for collective action if we want to really give water security for all, and especially in FCB countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Carmen, and for the sobering reminder about the context in which many people are actually living out their lives today. and the challenges of ensuring water security in the context of fragility. It does make one think about the comment that Loic made, that guns come before taps, and how unfortunate that is, and how much better the world would be if that kind of money was available for water and sanitation rather than for warfare. But thank you very much. We have come to the end of the introductory remarks from the presenters. I now have a couple of questions for the presenters. And just a reminder to participants that if you have any questions for any of the presenters, to put them into the chat box in the live stream, and we will try to make sure that we have some time to answer those, although I see that we are already running a bit behind schedule. And so in relation to that, I'm going to ask the speakers, in responding to the questions, if you can try and keep your answers to about 3 minutes, so we do have some time to respond to questions from the floor, and we try and keep it a bit tight. So the first question that I would like to put to somebody is to Dr. Oberle, which is the question of, do you consider that water is a common good? And can water security be decoupled from the issue of global politics and economic relations?
The answer to the first question is it's very clear. Water is a common good. And thus, to make it very clear, it does mean that it doesn't have a value or that it is for free. Water management and pollution prevention is expensive. Water flows through our economies. We cannot run industry, grow our food, make clothes, or survive without water and without this expenditure in water management and pollution prevention. We must respect the human right to water and sanitation, and we must make clearer links between ecosystem health as our source of water, and we must work collectively to ensure equitable access to water for people and nature. This is not about commodifying water, but it is about recognizing its value and that there is a cost to protect it, to clean up the pollution and to treat wastewater, to collect and store water, and we need to cover that cost to ensure we maintain healthy ecosystem and deliver equitable services. It is a common endeavor to use this good, and it can only be solved collectively. And this is the fundamental reason, because the good is common. It is because of how central water is to our lives that it becomes easy to answer also the second question on whether water security can be decoupled from global politics and economic relation. If we hope to solve the water security challenges the world faces, water security must not be decoupled from global politics and economic relation, exactly because it needs common actions. In my previous answer, I talked about collective action in linking stakeholders from different fields, be they governments, the private sector, academia, local communities. It should be clear that this collective action also applies to the world of global politics and economic relations. The world's water challenges are immense, but at the same time, we know that we have all the tools available to manage it well. We have technologies, companies, policies and regulation, resources and innovation that allow us to efficiently and safely manage our water resources. Not enough people realize today that water is a key circular resource, and that wastewater is not waste. It is, in fact, a new opportunity. We can take water from the environment, use it in multiple times, in multiple linked processes, allowing us to minimize our disturbance to the nature the natural world. But this ability often lies in wealthier countries, where we have managed to build the financial resources to allow us to do so. Take, for example, Singapore, which recycles treated sewage to produce water that it is safe for human consumption, and that it is now supplying up to 40% of the country's current water needs.
Bruno, can I ask you to keep it short, please?
Yeah, almost finished. We must implement greater cooperation between rich and poor world to allow the technology and skill to be transferred. We have to strengthen the finance for water, and we have to rethink the use of the existing finance earmarked today for agriculture, land management, and to be released to water management. We have technology, we have finance, we have the potential to do good regulations. And with these three elements, we can solve the problem around the sustainable and safe use of water. And we have to do it in a collective way at the global level, so that it links this automatically to the global challenges in securities.
Thank you very much indeed. Building on that, I'd like to turn to Carmen and ask, we have this additional challenge that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the water sector. In light of that, how would you think that policy, regulation and management frameworks across national and international levels can be improved to ensure water security and sanitation for all?
I believe that we need to continue to focus on improving WRM, water resource management, if we really want to deliver basic services like water and sanitation. And at the same time, if we want to keep building resilience of the systems. We are fully committed to the SDGs, and the importance of focusing on them, I think, is more paramount now than ever with the COVID situation. Indeed, the global goals are even more important, and we know they have to tackle down to national levels as well as international levels. The global goals in relation to water and sanitation are very, very ambitious, and we all know that. But they're also in need of being broken down into concrete laws and policies and actions at every single national level. And I see it firsthand in the countries that I manage in the MENA region. We're often partnering with client countries, not only to support the infrastructure, but more importantly, to improve both the policies and also ensure that there is resilience to prepare for the future. We cooperate to support increasing the capacity of institutions and implement them. And I think that's the way forward if we really want to achieve eventually the SDG. They all go hand in hand with each other. I think also, given the critical role that hygiene has proven to have in the pandemic in terms of trying to stop it, water supply and especially hand washing with soap is super important. And we should all try to help to develop content in projects, in the dialogues with the governments to ensure that that is tackled. From our point of view, at the World Bank Group, we're trying to do the best that we can to handle the situation of water and sanitation and wash, more important, in terms of COVID recovery. And we have identified 3 very important priority areas. The first one is the safe water supply, sanitation, and hygienic services that can go to healthcare facilities, because they're essential if we want to deliver the quality health services, if we want to protect patients, health workers, staff, and further transmission of this disease that is global. Second, providing communication and preparedness related to hand washing behavior. So there is the proper chains and the promotion of proper hand washing, because you'll be surprised in how many parts of the world that is not happening, and how that relates then to food hygienic or safe water practices. And third, and let me emphasize that because I think it's super important for the sector, is the support to utilities. Critical interventions for universal and safe access to water and sanitation can only be effective if we're really supporting them. If we really support them financially with liquidity facilities, and if we support them to be operationally stable, because otherwise the whole world will be collapsing in terms of the sector. And I know in the interest of time, I wanted to talk about a few examples, but I will stop there, Barbara. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Thank you very much for that indeed. Building on an issue that you raised, which was the issue of resilience, I would like to now turn to Loic and ask, in your understanding, how can we improve resilience to the climate disasters that we are seeing increasingly around the world of floods and droughts? How do you think that resilience can be improved and sustained?
Thank you. Water-related disasters have always existed in past centuries, when the climate evolution was not at the center of the public debate. But today, water-related disasters, we can observe that they are good customers for the media. Cyclones, hurricanes, tsunamis, landslides, and floods, they fascinate with terrifying images from disaster movies. There are mainly two kinds of water-related disasters, and a third one. Those caused by excess of water, usually referred to as floods, and then there are those less known, less mediatized, which are the consequence of the absence of water. These are the droughts that affect man and the natural environment on the scale of a region or a continent. This is how we speak of the thirst triangle from the south of Spain to Pakistan and back through the Horn of Africa. 1 billion inhabitants subjected today to climate variations. But more recently, a third type of water-related disaster has been added: the pollutions of lakes, rivers, groundwater, and the sea. Chemical pollution or industrial or agricultural origin, pollutions by plastics or pharmaceuticals, and still others, such as possible radioactive pollution. Floods, droughts, pollutions are as harmful to man as they are to nature, man and nature. The climate is not responsible for everything. Man is never far away, and the climate should not be the scapegoat for human errors. Demography, the urban concentrations on the banks of oceans and rivers, is also the major cause of the damage caused by these disasters. Sprawling housing, anarchic construction without respect for urban planning. Drought, the growth of cities in desert regions far from water resources, but also poor management and waste are also causing water shortages. How can we protect ourselves from this? How can we mitigate the effects of these disasters? We have to reduce the number of deaths and injuries and avoid exodus for millions of refugees from climate and poverty through huge national and local prevention policies. Prevention. Warning systems must become mandatory, as they are in a few countries. The presence of human activity in high-risk zones must be strictly regulated. Emergency plans must be generalized everywhere and regularly updated. prevention must become an integral component of development and resilience to the effect of disasters. It is a political issue. It needs political decisions, but also a societal one. Prevention and resilience must take place in school curricula, as seen, for example, in Japan or in certain regions of Indonesia. A high-level panel for water-related disasters was initiated 15 years ago by Mr. Ban Ki-moon. It's now chaired by Dr. Han Seung-soo, former Prime Minister of Korea, and we are participating within. Its missions must be amplified, and it means strengthened in order to continue to implement an international policy for water-related disasters prevention, but also post-disaster assessments and repairs. And similarly, the competence of UN water could be redefined to better coordinate the efforts of states in this field.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And I'm now going to turn to Sarah Ahmed and ask what collective action approaches do you think one can take to incentivize political willingness to provide safe and clean access to water, sanitation and hygiene for the most marginalized social groups? And do you think that such collective action has the potential to reduce corruption and lack of integrity in that regard?
Okay, thank you. Question, rather tough questions, and they come to me, I know. So I just want to start off by acknowledging what happened in India during the COVID during the pandemic and the lockdown, when we saw thousands of migrants walking across the dusty landscape getting home. And to me, what happened then was perhaps the biggest example of collective action that we've seen in recent times, with citizens coming out on the roads to provide migrants with clean water, with drinking water, with some food, with rations. And what we all did during those first few months of putting together kits for people in villages and poor urban communities, many of those kits, relief kits, included not just food, but soap, sanitizers, and in many cases, sanitary pads for young girls who did not have access to menstrual hygiene management because schools were closed. Yeah, so I think that was a spontaneous response and all. Now, India, I'm going to refer to my examples mostly from India because it is such a huge country and there have been so many exciting examples of decentralized water governance here over the last 25 years. The state has created this institutional framework, right from the center to state governments to blocks and then down to villages and communities. So that space has been there, and how communities with the support of NGOs and a range of other types of organizations have negotiated that space for collective action. And of course, that includes questions of power and gender and so on. I'll come back to that in a bit. But from WaterAid's own field areas, in some of the most backward regions of India, in eastern Uttar Pradesh, we've had these village water parliaments, which have brought together local community. They're called Jal Chopals. A chopal is a meeting place. And they brought together communities, experts, academics, researchers, but most importantly, the local leadership. And in 1 month last year, there were 470 of these parliaments in little villages. And I think that broke a world record of some sort or the other. And of course, there was response, there was innovative budgeting tools, there was talk about groundwater awareness, there was risk management, and all of those discussions were happening there. Similarly, in the same state, there have been movements with women to train them and to build their capacities to manage local water resources. And again, at scale, something like, working in 1,000 villages with these Sahelis, women water friends. Such, again, over a decade of work, building local capacities, and not only around drinking water, but also shifts in terms of the kind of crops that are grown in these villages, and thinking about low water intensive crops and so on. And then there are many such examples. There are examples in urban areas like in Mumbai. I won't really go into all of them because I know it'll take up time.
So, we're very short on time. Can you round it off, please?
I'm just going to finish. So what does it all say to us about collective action? I mean, there are many things that people have tried and tested, and I just put down 5 or 6 things that I think we need to pay attention to. And one is power relations in local communities. I think we need to recognize that there are multiple water users and users, and very often these are from the same water source. So how do we balance that for local communities? It's the same water. I think we talk a lot about women's participation in decentralized and community water management, but we don't often question the gender division of labor, which means that they're actually, still engaged with the care economy and still doing a lot of the work for management of water resources without. And for doing that, we really need to bring in men and boys into the whole discourse around water. And the last,
Sarah.
Just one more point about governance and accountability and the mechanisms for that. So there are many examples around participatory monitoring and community scorecards, etc. I'll stop at that.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for introducing the topic of gender into the conversation. It is obviously a critical issue, and often women's water security is more at risk than those of men, and they suffer more in context of water insecurity. We are rapidly running out of time, so we have one question that has come through, which I would like to put to Bruno, which is what global actions should be taken in the context of political communication in order to achieve water share equity among countries that share the same source of fresh water. And it's a huge question. I'm going to ask you to answer it in 1 minute if you can, which is terribly unfair.
Yes, I was looking at the question. I will ignore the political communication. Also, what global action should be taken to guarantee equity among countries that share the same watershed. The way I know, and the way that IUCN was also supporting in the last year, it is frank and open discussion among the country that share that watershed. It has to be supported by sound science to make everyone sure that it is treated at the same way like the other one. It is about finding the right way to compensate the different interests and the different point of view, and it is to be public under the eye of the global community, so that it is continuously watched. Of course, it would be easier if we would have a kind of global framework about the sustainable use and management of water at the global level. Call it convention or call it other instrument. But for the moment, we don't have such an instrument. So it is about the regional agreement.
Thank you very much for responding to that. We are now, I think, in the closing part of this. I'm afraid we don't have much more time for responding to questions. I would like now to call on the speakers to give their closing comments for about 2 minutes each, and to try and focus in those closing comments on the positive and constructive things that you would like to see being done in terms of collective action to improve water security. So I'm going to start by calling on Bruno to give us his closing comments.
Yeah. a short list of what we have heard. Water resources are limited. The demand is growing. The use and management, it is not good enough for now. And this is causing a lot of economic impacts, negative impacts, and pain to the affected populations. We know that water use and management is linked with global politics issues and economic relations, and this is related to the global security. We know that we need collective action at the local level, asking all the different sectors to talk and work together for a good use of the water in the watershed, and at the global level, among countries and globally. This is the challenge. The positive is that we have everything we know. We need. We have the technology. We have potentially the finance. We have the regulation, or at least example of good regulation. Let's share this knowledge. Let's put together what we know, and let's join forces to communitize this knowledge, this finance, these technologies, the regulation, maybe on a global platform on this issue. We can do it. We can do it definitively.
Good. Thank you very much for that very positive message. Sarah, would you like to come in with some closing remarks?
Yeah, just unmute myself. So going back to what I was talking about, gender and governance, I think as on the one hand, we keep talking about community and decentralization and water management at source and tap and all of that, but we're also seeing a lot of centralization of power and resources and decision-making around water. And I think the point that Lok brought up around money being spent on defense, etc. So we need to strengthen good governance and accountability, and there are many ways of doing it. There's transparency in budgets. In WASH budgets, we can look at gender budgeting tools that are increasingly being used in other sectors, and the WASH sector can learn from that. We can, we've, for the last, I don't know how many years, 20 years, we talk about women's participation in water governance, but we really don't see much change happening, and we don't see that change happening at higher levels. It's okay in villages, there are things happening, but if we did an audit, if we did a gender audit of our natural resource management bureaucracies, whether it's water, land, power, whatever, we would see very, very few women professionals in those organizations. So putting accountability where it matters, right? Whether it's in terms, I remember at a Stockholm World Water Week from UN Habitat, someone raised the point of performance appraisals and making people accountable in terms of their work, their outputs, so that are they really addressing issues of gender and equity. And when I say gender, I mean it intersects with many other things. It's race, it's what the Black Lives Matters has brought to the forefront. It's issues of caste and power and class and what's happening to our farmers. So there are many issues involved, but that's sort of what I'd like to say, that we need to strengthen decentralized governance.
Thank you very much for that indeed. Carl.
Great, I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay. Whoops.
Sure.
Let's try this here. I need to be let in, unfortunately. Let's try this, 2 seconds here. Being the photographer in the bunch, let's try this one more time. There we go. Okay, great. So let's go back to Jakarta for just a moment. And on the urban front, I mean, we're seeing people that have to deliver, this gentleman delivers water. People call for water by text because there is no central water system in these neighborhoods. So he pushes this cart that weighs more than 1,000 pounds. And imagine doing that every day. But also, we've talked about the relevancy part. One sector we haven't talked about, and Luke talked about the crises and the moments and how journalism chases these moments, which we're all guilty of in this field. But I think when we make the relevancy to our governmental leaders as well as to the corporate leaders. These are some of the key points that when we look at when we're covering this issue, again, the most important drama that's unfolding across the planet. And I think one of the biggest things, we've heard positive parts, but we also need to lay out the cost of failure is truly high. Now, Sarah was talking about transparency and the costs of risks and realities and relevancy. I think, again, we need to work really, really hard to make these issues relevant to the leaders. For example, the deputy mayor in Jakarta told me, he said, we have 13 rivers that run black. We have plenty of water, but we need the political will and the investment and the processes, say from the World Bank or Water Resources Group, to actually put that knowledge into action, into collective action. But there also has to be pressure from the ground up, from the people who rely on those push carts for water. They need to have a voice in the picture. And fortunately, we have new tools and better ways of listening today for those voices to be surfaced and to bring a level of transparency. This is a gentleman who lives next to a river in Hyderabad that runs with about 6 feet of foam on top from industry upstream. But he can take a picture of that, and that can put that worldwide. And that can also bring extra levels of data and analytics to hotspots around the world and spotting them before they happen. So one thing that we are playing with, and we in the water sector and we at Circle of Blue and Vector Center, is listening better. And this is just an example of how people are talking about water at certain times and certain moments around the world and the big issues, because these issues are huge. And what drives me and the passion, I think, of everybody else here and those tuned in is that we have young fathers like this one in Flint, Michigan, who's terrified about his child's future because of drinking contaminated water from lead poisoning, and from the lead pipes. And we have this profound migration that's starting to occur now. This is in Sao Paulo. I took this during the World Water Forum in Brasilia. This is in Sao Paulo, where the streets are actually named for the villages that people have left behind because of drought and water stress. And very, very quickly, I just want to come back to Wu Yun, who lives in Inner Mongolia near the coal mines. The last time I visited the coal mines, we're getting closer, and the beautiful grasslands were starting to turn to swales of sand. They shouldn't look that way. So the last message I just want to leave everybody with is the hope for our future is truly the one that we deliberately design, particularly with young people, new technologies, new storytelling capacities, new government structures, that we truly have to build in the incentives and the tenacity and empower our leaders with that level of knowledge, because we truly are designing water's future right now. This is that moment. So I'll leave that there. And I would encourage people to tell their own stories better, particularly in the water sector. And those that are listening, tell your water stories widely to your neighbors, your businesses, and your government leaders.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Carl. And once again, for those very powerful photographs that tell so much in their own way. Dr. Fauchon, I'd like to call on you, please, for your closing remarks.
Thank you. What can we say to conclude? World water security requires first and at least a political response. And all citizens, not only the politicians, all citizens have to join the political debate. Giving priority to water means first that states decide to increase water resources and ensure the best and most balanced water distribution between water for man and water for nature. But it also means becoming totally aware that water security requires passing laws and regulations along with budget translation this priority into action. And it shows the importance of the role of parliaments everywhere in the world. And it also means the right to water. The right to water is an easy question to put forward, but so difficult to achieve daily. No doubt, the United Nations and the international community must insist that each state Each state must enshrine the right to water in its constitution. And at this very moment, only 40 to 50 states have done that only. But in slums or the most remote areas, the minimum allocations of fresh water remain difficult. This is the exact moment when water security and the right water merge together. It's about respect. It's about dignity for each person, for each family, and for each community. And through these goals lays the objectives for collective action, as you have mentioned, bringing together innovation and knowledge, sharing blended finances and honest governance. All governments, all parliaments, all basins organizations, all municipalities, media and citizens must go with this. And it joins what Carl was saying. We have to speak about water everywhere, daily, and in front of every kind of community. This is also the purpose of the World Water Forums that we have been organizing since 1997, by bringing together people from all over the world to speak loudly, to give priority to water. Next forum will be held in Dakar next year, or perhaps a little bit later. The collective action that we are all striving for needs contribution from everywhere to address people's expectations through a concrete response to be able to move to action. Before, I would like to say that we will be very honored to host the IUCN Congress in Marseille, I hope in the middle of the next year. And Bruno, you will be very much welcome. So you are all, with no exception, welcome to contribute to shape the future of water and the future of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Loic. And the last, again, Carmen, if I can hand over to you for some closing remarks, please.
Thank you. I don't have any closing remarks that would be any different than my fellow panelists. That's the beauty of coming last. But I want to pinpoint on a few things. The first one is that we heard at the beginning that water is life. We also have heard that under COVID, everything has been shaken of what we know in the world, right? And water cuts across every single sector of the economy, and we're seeing how economies are being affected. So it's very clear that, yes, this is a huge call for collective action, that there is no single minute that we should be wasting. Because again, also water is a limited resource we have in the world. So we really need to come together, not only the civil society, but the citizens, the governments, the media, the multilaterals, the private sector. And we really, really need to really shake ourselves and work for the future of the generations that are coming after us, because that's what it keeps me awake at night. If my kids or my grandkids one day cannot have water, and perhaps because I work in the most water scarce region in the world, MENA, right? So again, I think COVID has given us even more of a strong shake that we really need to have collective action if we really want to meet that important SDG of water security for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Carmen. And thank you very much to all the speakers and to everybody who has been listening to this online. I think that we've had some very, very interesting input and some critical issues raised. I'm not going to repeat everything that everybody has said. And I think the closing remarks from people have summed up some of the critical issues and way forward very well. I would just like to highlight a couple of things. We heard a call for new ethical value, and linked to that, a call for recognizing the rights, the human right to water and sanitation of the most marginalized globally. We also need to recognize the rights of the ecosystem of the other creatures that share this world with us. And that in achieving that, Some people are going to have to use less water in order that others can actually use more and meet their rights. We have the knowledge, we have a number of tools. It is up to us through collective action at all levels and recognizing the power and the voice of civil society to take action in actually achieving the future that we want to see. And I think that Carl used the words, we need to deliberately design our own future. And I think that we can achieve that designed future if we come together through collective action at all levels. And in terms of civil society, we have enormous power and enormous strength that we can exert actually at all levels in achieving that deliberately designed and ethical future that we all wish to see. So on that note, I would like to thank everybody very much for their participation in this session, and to say that the best recognition of the value that has come out of this session is for everybody to take it into action in the real world and to actually start bringing about and continue to bring about change. So thank you very much to everybody for their participation, and I wish you all well, and I hope that you stay safe in this rather strange world that we are currently living in.